Wonderful. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Cantatori. I am the training director for Worth Ross Management Company and would like to welcome you all to a January speaker series. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, we welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us. So we designed these exclusive events to bring industry-leading experts to center stage for a unique and uninterrupted experience like no other. You'll gain valuable insight, learn about best practices, and have the opportunity to ask questions towards the end. Our speakers are carefully selected and are familiar with specific needs, challenges, and the opportunities that association boards and managers are faced with. Before we get too far into discussion, I do want to let you know that we are recording this session and we will make it available after the presentation. I will distribute the link once it is available on our YouTube channel. We want to make sure that all of our board members and managers have the resources they need in order to best lead their communities. And that is what leads us to today's speaker series event. So tonight will be a panel presentation, and we'll be discussing best practices to prepare for cold weather, and it's going to be presented by some of our WRMC leadership team members. So the format for this evening would be similar to the previous events that we've had, where the panelists present and the information afterwards, approximately 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes are left at the end for Q&A. So if you do have any questions within that time, please make sure you send that to me in the chat box. Now, some of you have already submitted some of those questions prior when you did register, and we'll be asking those questions here as well. So with that being said, just with a nod of the head, presenters, are you ready to get started?
I'm ready.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so let's meet our presenters. So we have Bob Mitchell, and he is actually the Vice President of Engineering and Risk. We have Sherry Schmokel, who is the General Manager at the Bonaventure. Scott Stringfellow is the Chief Engineer at the Independent, and George Skirbin is actually the Colorado Regional Director. So we have all of our markets represented. This is pretty exciting. All right, so this is the agenda that we'll be discussing this evening. So, and how it affects association team members, building interior common areas and pipes, how cold weather affects homeowner units, building exterior, swimming pools, spas, and fountains, landscaping and irrigation systems, our garages, HVAC systems, and of course, roofs. All right, so now with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Sherry.
Thank you, Nicole. And thank you to everyone who's joining this evening. As Nicole said, my name is Sherry Schmokel. I am in the Dallas-Fort Worth marketplace. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about best practices for cold weather in relationship to your team members and communication, because this is vital when you're preparing for cold weather. Availability of your team members. Before the cold weather comes in, you need to know who is going to be available, who is close by, who can get there quickly, who may not be able to get there. Do you have anyone that needs to or can stay on site? I know that in the February storm here in our building, we had several of our maintenance team members staying around the clock in the building. Do you have a guest suite for them to stay in the building? Do you have the ability to book a hotel for those people close by the building? We actually had to purchase some sleeping bags and keep them in hand for our staff members just to stay in the building. Preparing your staff for backup with third-party vendors or other association members. If you have third-party vendors that you already have communication and relationships with, you might want to put them on notice before a storm event that you may need some assistance. If you anticipate plumbing needs, electrical needs, you might want to get those people, give them a little gift basket or a gift card to say thank you for all the stuff you've done to us, and put your building at the top of the list. Is there a protocol, and have you reviewed it with your team? Do you have to start up a generator? Do you have to get your space heaters out? Do you have to get portable generators for things like charging cell phones or keeping your maintenance rooms heated? What kinds of protocols do you need for your building, and make sure that your entire team knows what those are? Do you have a cold weather survival kit, and what is included? Things like batteries, recharging systems for iPhones and Android phones, water, blankets, non-perishable foods, propane tanks, space heaters, flashlights, battery-powered lighting. Our building has purchased some of those glow sticks for stairwells and for hallways, so that if we do have a power outage for any period of time, we have other mechanisms available to make sure people don't have to worry about being in an unlit area or an unsafe area. And for the employees, the staff members, ensuring that they have proper work attire. A lot of the buildings, I believe, probably provide uniforms for their staff. We also provide jackets, hats, gloves, umbrellas here at our building. We do probably not provide rain and non-slip boots, but that may be something we need to consider for our building. When you're communicating about cold weather events, how are you going to communicate? Not just to your team members, but also to your residents and your owners. Freeze warning signs. This is an easy way to make sure everybody's aware we're expecting a freeze. Please drip your faucets. Please open up your cabinet doors. Your residents are going to need to be communicated with as well. How are you going to communicate with your team and homeowners? Are you going to do this by email or cell phone? If you have no power, those items may not be available to you. You may have to put signs up in specific areas. Make sure that your residents know what those areas are going to be, where they should expect to see those communications. That's vitally important when other ways of communicating aren't going to be available. And do you have an emergency contact list for each team member? Do you have their cell phone and their home numbers, so that if there's any way that you need to be in communication with them, you have that ability? Now, while we're talking about the cold weather events and preparing for this inside of our buildings, there's so many things that could happen. We cannot possibly cover them all in this presentation. But if the power for your building's out for more than 24 hours, we're advising staff to make sure that they notify the Worth-Ross risk management team at the email that's listed there. That way we can get you additional support if it's needed. And with that, I will turn it over to George.
There we go, found the unmute. Thank you, Sherry, very much appreciate that. Again, my name is George Skirb, and I'm the Colorado Regional Manager up here in the beautiful state of Colorado. And I'm going to talk about things that, we look at inside the building, inside owners' homes, some helpful tips, of course, as was mentioned. There's so many to list, but we're going to list the major ones here. And one of the most important things we like to look at, of course, are heaters and heating systems in your home and in the building, and making sure they're working properly. We like to recommend that, just as general preventive maintenance program, that those are serviced 4 times a year is a good rule of thumb to make sure they're working. And especially, in the winter season before the cold gets here, make sure that heater's working great. Some places may have heat trace systems. That would be, for those of you that may not know that, imagine that as a cabling type device that maybe wraps a pipe that runs through electricity, keeps the pipe warm, keeps it from freezing. Building staff or an outside contractor can easily come in and test those with a volt-o-meter to make sure they're working properly. And as you're looking at your heating systems, you want to, of course, make sure your mechanical room heaters are working, because that's, in high-rise buildings, a very vital part of the operation and heartbeat of those buildings. Other thing to look at are entryways. Are they clear of ice, free of snow? Some entryways here, you'll see in Colorado especially, are heated. So make sure those heating devices or heating systems are turned on early enough so before the snow or the cold gets here, they have a chance to heat up so ice does and snow doesn't accumulate on those. Also, a good thing is to keep some ice melt on hand. Some places will purchase a 5-gallon bucket from a local hardware store, put some ice melt in it with a little bit of a scoop, voluntary system, folks can come in and scoop it out as they see fit to keep those areas free and clear of ice, to avoid those trip and fall situations, which can end very badly in some cases. As you're looking at those areas and those entries, of course, many of them have mats. As the snow melts or water melts, well, that can freeze. So make sure the mats are dry, they're clean. If the mats are wet, replace them with a dry mat. Try to keep those areas safe. We don't want the folks slipping on a mat in the entryway. Floor signs visible from all angles. I know that seems like common sense, but sometimes, a little reminder does not hurt. Letting people know, hey, it could be slippy over here. Be careful, especially if there's a moisture area and ice gets down there, and maybe in some cases, we've heard this term black ice or ice you can't see. That can happen. That freezes over, and if there's a little bit of a warning there that it could be slippery, it reminds folks to really be careful in those areas. I've found myself in many cases where I did not see an icy situation, and fortunately, my balance prevented me from falling down. But that could, some people may not be so fortunate that happens. Continuing into, the areas of the building, space heaters. Space heaters are an important component in a building, as needed or as requested if there's might be a little boost needed in the location. But one of the things that we're seeing, and I'm seeing especially here in Colorado, is some of the local municipalities are starting to require permits for these things. So just make sure that your management team is double checking the municipality for any permit requirements for those space heaters. We don't want any violations from the city codes regarding those items. Now, looking at your outdoor air intake by the HVAC equipment, those are typically regulated, per the outdoor conditions, but just make sure they're operating properly. Looking at low temperature areas in the building, there might be some cold spots that could happen. To keep eye on that, make sure those proper, increased building patrols or property walks or property site visits are happening maybe on an escalated basis, just to watch out for those things. Cold spots in the middle of a building could be an interior bathroom or a bathroom that may be susceptible to cold temperatures. We don't want any freeze event happening in those areas. And we know they're full of plumbing, and we don't want to flood. The interior building patrols, water leaks. If there's a small water leak somewhere, maybe it wasn't noticed. Maybe it got generated from the change in temperatures. Dripping somewhere, it could freeze up again, creating an ice slick. There could be a spot power outage, but a person would think, well, if the power goes out, I might know. Well, there could be a spot outage, maybe a breaker blew for some particular reason, and you may not be aware of it. So that's why it's important to watch for those spot occurrences that could happen. And of course, if you see those, look at either resetting the breaker or getting that space heater in there to prevent those freezing incidents from happening. Just as important for the areas that people congregate in common, there's their own homes. And again, we talked about, pre-season inspections for HVAC in those conditions. Again, just a reminder, 4 times a year is good, 5 times are better. But and especially in the winter, when those freezes come in, it's always good to make sure that heater is working. One of the things to really let folks know, if they're going to be away from home, especially when we're away from home or away for an extended period of time, set that thermostat to 58 degrees, because that will help freeze conditions from happening inside the home that could happen. One thing that is helpful, because I've done this myself, sometimes I'll leave and oh my God, I forgot to set my thermostat. And we have huge temperature swings here in Colorado, and some days I'll just turn my heat off, but if something happens, I'm not aware, I say, oh, thank God I got a smart thermostat. I'll just turn it on through my cell phone, and I save the day many times by doing that. Spigot covers. We look at spigot covers. Maybe, we don't think of those much other than the summer when we're, watering our garden or the common areas or cleaning a deck or whatnot. Spigot covers are a good thing to put on to insulate those valves and those spigots from freezing. Those are readily available, online, local hardware store. You can get those things to keep those things from freezing over. But one important thing to remember about those spigots, disconnect the hose, because that can also contribute to failure of those systems. A lot of folks I'll see, leave the hoses on, get a wrench if it's stuck over the summer, crank that thing off and set it aside. You don't want that valve freezing up. Part of it too, of looking at, pipe systems, maybe an opportunity you have to, drip a faucet. 1 drip per second is generally a good golden rule of thumb to do that. The thing to be careful with that though is if it's dripping, make sure it's not causing a slip hazard by dripping in an area that's going to freeze over, that there's proper drainage for that water dripping from. And what that helps is it keeps the water flowing in the pipe so pressure doesn't build up. And if pressure does build up in the pipe because it freezes over, then of course it bursts. So the idea is to keep the pipe protected by keeping a small water flow in there and alleviate that pressure. And then especially be mindful of if you have an exterior, especially exterior cabinets or exterior plumbing that might be next to exterior wall, like a kitchen sink, might be a bathroom or a bathtub or something might be, I guess, exterior wall, or some sort of water closet. Open those doors, get the heat in there just so it keeps that area a little bit warmer, so those don't freeze up on the plumbing lines in those areas. We don't want, again, those simple things bursting. You have water supply lines, you have your angle stops in there. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong if those things freeze. So be careful of those areas. Continuing on window openings and window frames. A lot of wind happens. These cold fronts come in, they bring a lot of wind. Those winds can push through gaps and even small gaps or even wider gaps in window systems, window framing. A good solution, get some cheap, inexpensive weather stripping from Home Depot, Lowe's, whatnot. They're usually self-adhesive. You can stick it on as a temporary fix to get through the storm to keep that cold air from blowing in. Water heaters. A lot of times people don't think about their water heaters. If you're in a high-rise building, you might have a central boiler system, maybe not so much of a problem. But if you're in a garden community or a townhouse style, sometimes the water heaters are in the garage. Sometimes they're in a water closet outside the garage. Are those areas properly insulated? What happens if they're not? Well, those things can be susceptible to freezing. One of the things that folks can look at doing is wrapping the water heater in a blanket. There are blankets specifically designed for water heaters. And there's also materials specifically designed for those water heater pipe systems to keep those things protected in those cold temperatures. Emergency space heaters. Again, we're stressing this because they should only be used in emergency purposes. I know it seems like common sense, keep flammable materials distance at least 15 feet or greater from those space heaters. I like to tell folks, that that giant green egg on your patio or balcony is not your space heater. It stays out on the patio. Use them selectively. Sometimes if you have those spots, areas that are cold, or you have some sort of power failure and you can't get the heat going. In terms of if you're on maybe the gas line is down or something, or some delivery system, the furnace doesn't run because there's something wrong with that connection, or the heat doesn't get up. You got that space heater to save the day, keep yourself warm, keep your fuzzy little friends at home, the four-legged type, and everybody's all happy. Another thing that I look at, important thing to consider is if you're occupied. Look at those water shutoff and isolation valves. It's good to shut the water down. And the thing to remember too on those things is if you're able to drain the line, if you shut off the isolation valve, it's a good idea to do that. I've seen situations where the domestic water was shut off at the isolation valve, but the drain line wasn't drained. And sometime throughout the winter or freeze, the pipes froze, they broke, but nobody had any idea about it until the spring came and those valves were turned back on, and lo and behold, a multi-$1,000 insurance claim because the pool house flooded because those lines in those isolation valves were not drained, froze, cracked, and flooded the whole building. So that's something to keep in mind. And the same thing applies with your home. If you're vacant and you're away and there's nobody there to keep an eye on it, just be a good idea to drain those things out before you go on your trip. And with that, I'll now turn it over to Scott.
Okay, great. Thanks, George. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being on the webinar with us. My name is Scott Stringfellow. I'm the chief engineer here at the Independent Building in Austin, Texas. HVAC winterization is a big part of any freeze prevention plan. HVAC equipment is one of the most costly and most vulnerable to freezing weather because sections of it are outside and typically susceptible to freezing. I know, like Sherry said a while ago, there's so many things we can't go over all of them, but let's take a look at a few things before freezing weather is upon us. Steps to prepare your HVAC for cold weather and freezing weather. Schedule your preventative maintenance. As we were talking earlier about having your trusted contractors, that's huge to have these contractors available and have the relationship set up with them so that when you need them, you can get them there in a hurry, because on some of these events, they're scattered all over town. So make sure you have those relationships and they're doing the scheduled preventative maintenance for quarterly visits with maybe an annual. Is always recommended on these systems, your furnaces, your unit heaters. And the unit heaters are the mechanical room heaters. Those get so overlooked. And if you just would check those out, you can save yourself a lot of grief and hassle, just making sure that heater kicks on. Boilers, same thing. They should be going over the boilers. You may not need to do a boiler inspection in the summer unless you're running it, but you should be doing boiler inspections at least several times through the heating season. Quarterly is definitely advised. Stock up on some of these. Your trusted contractors can help you with this. They can replace some of the worn parts as they do their preventative maintenance. Look at the heat strips, check all these things out. They can do an amp meter on the heat strips to see that they're cooking right. And you may not know that they weren't otherwise. And stock up on the critical parts. The contractors that you're working on, if they're reputable contractors and they've got their wherewithal about them, they can recommend, hey, look, we think these parts in your systems are the most notorious or susceptible to failing prematurely or when it's not desired, and which could be during a freeze. And if that happens and the parts aren't available, well, look, you just go to your supply shelf. Hey, contractor, I've got new heating element strips here. Would you please replace that for me? And you should be good. Part of that preventative maintenance also is either your in-house staff or these trusted contractors could go through and make sure the ductwork is intact. Because if your HVAC equipment is working, but it's not actually blowing the CFM, the heated air, out to the areas that you really need it to work, then you may still end up freezing anyway, even though all your equipment's working right. So ductwork and airflow is going to be a critical thing for that. And they can check that discharge. It might be that it's obstructed by a box or who knows what. So not only should they be looking at the mechanical equipment, but they really should be kind of an overall system view, primarily before this freezing event. Sure, we should be doing preventative maintenance throughout the whole year, but if you know a freezing event is coming, I would go ahead and expedite that call and not wait on the PM and go ahead and have that preliminary inspection before the freeze so it doesn't catch you off guard. Also, check out some of these, we were talking about water heaters being outside or attic spaces or, void areas in the building that you may not think about. Could even be a chase in there with plumbing lines in it. And it should be inspected for adequate insulation. Insulation will settle and compress over time. Fluffy insulation has a better heat retaining property than compressed insulation. So definitely don't overlook the insulation, because I think sometimes you just think insulation's an out of sight, out of mind thing up in the attic, but it really can be your friend and save you a lot of trouble. Okay, so in addition to winter prep, let's review a few of the things on the exterior. The notification and communication that we've talked about earlier, putting the freeze warning signs out and closing off unsafe areas, that may be the biggest thing that saves everybody some serious issue and heartbreak and potential injury, is if you've got a staircase that is prone to freezing, no matter what you do, close it off. Obviously, if there's not another route, you may have to de-ice it or whatever, but close these areas off and get the signage out could be a really huge thing to impact everybody, homeowners and team members and everybody. Test and inspect the heat trace, like George had mentioned earlier. That is a critical thing. The heat trace, as a matter of fact, I have a little example of it here. This is what it's not a bomb, but this is an example of a pipe. And matter of fact, this one busted because the heat trace was not adequate, but it would look like this. And typically it's installed at like at an angle like so to where the heat climbs up the pipe, but it's concealed under insulation. So you have to put a meter on this because you won't visually be able to inspect it. That will save you hundreds, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of your property, maybe millions, if your heat trace is properly working. So definitely get your trusted contractor. If your on-site people are familiar with it or are familiar with how to operate it and test it, your trusted contractor should be able to get a meter on it and learn, and examine the heat trace and be able to, through putting meters and operating it, be able to tell if it's working properly. Once again, these unit heaters inside the mechanical rooms, huge thing, like especially for a generator, like my generator here at the Independent building. It's a massive generator with a 700-gallon fuel tank. If that unit heater is not working right, my big tank of fuel could gel up like a big bowl of jelly, and then you could do your diesel run on it. So that unit heater is critical, and it will save in your mechanical rooms. It will save pipes from busting and all that stuff. Just because you have the little cheesy heater hanging in the ceiling that you never paid attention to all summer, well, now it's time to have a guy take a look at it, because that would really be a big deal. But this is all provided you do have power, because obviously if your heaters are working but your electricity won't, well then you're going to have to come up with Plan B, which we'll hit that a few points to that in just a moment. The batteries on the charger for the generator and your flashlights and all your chargeable things. If you know the storm is coming in, you really should double check the charger on the generator. And if you don't have a generator, this may not be applicable, but for a lot of the guys in our industry, we do have emergency generators. And if it's not being exercised weekly, really, you could be susceptible for the thing not starting up when it's needed. The fuel, you do have to top up the fuel regularly. And like I exercise mine weekly for 15 minutes on a Tuesday morning. And then I just monitor the fuel to make sure that it's always close to a full tank. But you exercise the thing, because if you're not exercising it, you may have a power loss and then boom, the generator doesn't start because of it not being regularly exercised. Now, if you don't have power, one of the biggest things here at my building, I'm 700 feet tall here in Austin, downtown, with the tallest building in the city. And I'm so afraid if we do lose power, my sprinkler system is going to lose pressure. And when my system loses pressure, and then even though the generator's kicked on, everything will be good for a little while. But at some point, if I lose pressure and then we restore power, my pumps fire up and it will just blow my sprinkler system apart. So if I do lose pressure, I'm going to potentially stage my sprinkler system in such a way to where, if I can maintain it, great. If I can't, I might consider draining the sprinkler system if it got to heavy enough serious issue. Long periods without power, you may need to manually cycle your generator so that you don't run out of fuel. Because if you do have a serious freeze event, your fuel supplier may not come to you. So I've got about 6 to 8 hours with a relative high load on the generator that I can run. So if I know I got a 4-day, 5-day freeze and I lost power, well, maybe I run the generator for just an hour or two a day just to keep batteries charged and have some sort of presence of power. Just something to consider. Manually open your gates if you lost power, because if you don't have power, you could be stuck inside your garage or inside a hallway or whatever the case is. A lot of things will fail safe to where they're unlocked. And if you lose power, you can get out, but some cases, maybe not. So like at our garage here at the building, we'll raise that gate up so that people can get out and they're not reliant on power to get out. So definitely something to consider to not trap people in areas. You could also, if you lose power or it's about to happen, shut all your amenity decks down, because, goodness, who needs to play a game of pool or go swimming when, you've got your power out? So definitely options to keep in mind. If you can reduce your building load during a power outage, your generator will run longer. So with that being said, if your power is out for more than 24 hours, please feel free to reach out to the WRMC Risk Management Team at WRMC-riskteam@worthwatts.com. The email is down there and you can reference it later if need be. continuing on here, building exterior issues. I know we hit on getting the cheesy Home Depot weather stripping stuff, which is a great fix in a pinch. If you have time in the foresight, though, have your weatherproofing or your trusted GCs get out and do an examination. I mean, I'd say this at least annually should be done anyway. But in weather that is agreeable, go out and check all of your building entries, your doorways, your windows, and other openings, things, maybe stuff on the roof that you didn't even see or know about. These contractors should be able to help you identify these areas and then take remediation steps to solve all of the infiltration. The air infiltration. Visually inspect railings. This was huge here for me at the Independent because on our last February freeze in 2021, we had giant icicles hanging from our roof that, 700 feet in the air, I thought, if that thing falls, it'll do a lot of damage. So we kind of selectively went off and knocked off safely in a controlled way the icicles that were accumulating on the exterior. For us here in Texas, snow removal contracts are not necessarily saying we'd never do it, but we typically don't do it. I know George up in Colorado probably has those snow contracts, but I know George had discussed that he would not wait to the last minute to make sure those were in place. So making sure that the snow removal contracts, if that's something adequate or associated with your association, then that's definitely something to consider. In irrigation systems outside, definitely shut the water off. I think your plants would probably make it to a freeze. You could probably be fine on a few days while it's freezing to shut off your irrigation system. And if possible, drain it. It may not be able to drain because it's at a low spot, but if you can drain the system, that's even better. On really cool, 20 below or 20 degrees Fahrenheit below, you could potentially get some serious hard freezing, especially for an extended time. Insulate any of the exposed irrigation lines with either Armaflex, that rubber wrap, or a fiberglass insulation, or even a towel or something if it's just going to be a brief period. But exposed piping will break if it's got water in it. You can almost guarantee it if you've got low enough temperatures. You might even consider, in some places I've heard that and I've seen it happen with our landscaping guys, they will actually irrigate the plants and everything ahead of time to get like a layer of ice in the roots to help act as an insulator. The ice itself actually helps protect the plants from freezing. So definitely something to consider to cycle it out. And then once again, if you can drain it, in certain extreme conditions, you might even have to have a contractor or in-house folks hook up nitrogen or compressed air and actually blow the water out of the lines, because even a small amount of water can crack up your irrigation line. So definitely something to consider there. Landscaping, once again, these blankets here at the Independent, we have probably $30,000–$40,000 worth of plants out around our amenity decks and swimming pools. We've actually hired a contractor who's come up with a really neat design, and he has kind of a custom built blanket system that covers these plants. And so far we've had a couple of minor freezes and they've weathered really well with being covered. So you could use plastic if it was a last ditch effort thing, but if you have the forethought to get them covered, you'll save your plants unless it's really hard. Have them trim back too. You can trim these plants back, and that will make sure that the main body of the plant can weather the storm a little easier and not have all the outlying parts of the plant just freeze. On swimming pools, we have ours heated here, and we only have a few days that would maybe even be a concern. So for a lot of folks here in Texas, you could probably ride through a day or so of it just being freezing. But I know if you hit like 10 degrees, you better have a plan for that pool, whether it be heated, once again, insulate all the lines that are going to be exposed. Your equipment room should have a heater in it so that it can keep the pump and the filter and all of that stuff and all the interconnecting piping and tubing, keep that stuff at a temperature above freezing. So, I mean, if you can keep it at 40 degrees, it'll be cool, but it won't freeze. So definitely something to make sure that your pool equipment is protected in whatever means that you have to do so. A floated weight device or a cover might be appropriate for some people. I wouldn't drain it necessarily, because even if it freezes over, your pool may be fine. You just want to keep the interconnecting piping and all the equipment from freezing. So definitely swimming pool stuff. The easiest, obviously, is just have a heater. And I don't know if you have one or if not, but that definitely, having the heater going at a decent, reasonable temperature will keep your water in your swimming pool and the connected equipment from freezing. So goodness, I could probably go on for another hour about all this stuff, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Sherry, and let's see what you have. Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you, Scott. Please don't go on for another hour. Okay, so garages and walkways. Again, these are areas that are going to be probably more susceptible to trip and fall hazards during cold weather events, because they're generally not heated spaces. For your garages and walkways, if you have a dry pipe system, make sure that you drain it through the drum drips. And again, as I believe it was George or Scott, maybe both, mentioned, cover those exterior faucets with some sort of insulation cups that you can purchase at Home Depot or online, or even if you have nothing else available, because during a freeze, those things get snapped up quickly. Wrap towels around them and put some duct tape around all of that to keep it insulated. Visually inspect your exposed plumbing pipe insulation to make sure that, again, as Scott was talking about, the heat trace is functioning, but also if you have any failed insulation or you have had a repair done in the past and insulation hasn't been put back, you need to make sure that that is there to protect all of the visible and exposed pipe that you may have. Make sure that you have de-icer on site. Make sure that you have it before we have an event, because again, once the event gets started or there's an anticipated event, it is not going to be available, or it's going to be available at a really elevated, escalated cost. Make sure any ramps, sidewalks, high traffic areas, any areas susceptible to freezing are de-iced, or as Scott mentioned, maybe you just close them off so that no one can access those areas. Again, pre-stock the ice melt. It's not going to be available when you need it if you don't already have it. Some buildings have had it on site for a couple of years because we haven't had events, and then all of a sudden you need it and you don't have any. Considering closing areas, again, that tend to accumulate ice and create slip and fall hazards, use cones, use tape, use signs, use anything that you can, because if someone does have a slip and fall event, that's going to present some liability for your building that you really do not want to have when it's easily preventable. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob.
Sherry, thank you so much. So hi, everybody. I'm Bob Mitchell with Worth Ross Management. So another thing to consider for preparing for cold weather is your roof. So the roof of your building is one of your largest assets of your entire association. So preparing your roof for cold weather and freezing weather is really a critical part of protecting your association and also the units below the roof. So let's take a little closer look of how to prepare your roof for the cold weather. So have your preferred roofing contractor inspect your roof prior to cold weather. So have a list, call them, have them come out and inspect your roof before the cold weather is headed your way, and be sure that you have their contact name and their emergency contact information, so that way you can call them if needed. Perform all minor repairs to your roof prior to cold weather. So even though there may be only the minor repairs, it's not the time to delay those minor repairs. That can make a big difference in the performance of your roof. Also, remove all debris off your roof. So debris can actually puncture your roofing membrane or system if it's stepped on. So it also might clog your drain. So during your inspections, please remove all debris off of your roofs. Also, check, inspect, and clean your roof drains, your gutters, and your scuppers. So clogged drains and scuppers and gutters, they'll cause water to pond up on your roof, and in cold weather that water will freeze. That frozen water on your roof can damage your roofing membrane. Also, check all your flashings and your joints for failure. It's another thing for your preferred roofing contractor to look at. So flashings and joints and laps, they can all cause water intrusion under that cap sheet in your roofing system. So, and that water intrusion, where does it go? It goes to the units below. And what's below the roof? And that's your penthouse units. So let's help protect those penthouse units. Also, in order to avoid and eliminate ice dams, during an inspection of your roof, get a broom or a squeegee and move that water over to your roof drain. You may have to do that on a daily basis during a storm if there's a lot of water and rain, but continue to do that so that water won't pond and freeze. Also, eliminate all non-essential foot traffic from your roof. So reducing foot traffic on your roof, that helps your roofing system. So you can do that by either locking that door or put a fob on that access door to the roof. Also, check all equipment that services your building that's on your roof. So check all your mechanical systems, check your equipment on the roof, make sure that there's no frozen pipes or broken lines or leaking water on the roof. Also, check all roof mounted equipment, that it is securely fastened to your roof and it's not shaking around. Also, ensure that the Worth-Ross Management Company annual roof maintenance program is installed and active on your roofing system. So the WRMC annual roof maintenance program, it provides inspections and it provides maintenance from your preferred contractor to your roof. And those tune-ups help protect your roofing system and your units below the roofing system. So also ensure that there is preventive maintenance that has been completed on your elevator cooling equipment prior to freezing weather. So elevator HVAC units help protect those mechanical rooms, not only in the summer, but also in the winter. Inspect your building plumbing vent pipes for ice buildup. And yes, it happened in Winter Storm Uri last year that our plumbing vent pipes on our roof, they froze shut. So that happened in several associations. So inspect those and don't let that ice build up on those vent pipes. So this list of best practices for your roof will help keep your roof in great shape and also reduce the risk of damage and of water events and water intrusion into your units. So here's another best practice for cold and freezing weather. So we strongly recommend that you develop a strong working relationship with at least 2 of your restoration and mitigation vendors. But of course, it's your choice of who you use. It's best to establish that relationship prior to needing their service, but also from a preferred restoration vendor. So at Worth-Ross Management, we have a RSA contract that's called a response service agreement with Blackman Mooring. And we have a brand new contract called an MSA contract, and that's a master service agreement. And that's with ServPro Team Shaw. And that's a brand new agreement that we just signed. But again, the choice of the vendors is yours on who you use for your association. One tip that we learned in Winter Storm Uri was when you have a situation of a water event, call the water restoration company or the mitigation vendor, call them as soon as possible to get your association on their list for service, but also for equipment, because a lot of associations were without service and without equipment in Winter Storm Uri because they didn't make that call soon enough. Also, our general managers can utilize our Worth-Ross Management cold weather checklist, and that helps prepare your association prior to any storm. And that list is available in SharePoint for all of our general managers. And with that, let's turn it over back to Nicole.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I hope you can still hear me. My earpiece stopped working, so I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. You cannot hear me? Yes, you can. Sort of, kind of.
I can hear you. You just sound like you're in a tunnel, Nicole.
Give me 1 second. I apologize for that technical difficulty. Perhaps it's charged enough to work. Let me try this again. Let's hope this works. I know that there were some questions that came in.
Okay, does that put me back? Can you guys
Yes.
hear me? Okay,
Yes.
excellent. I guess it charged enough. Thank you so much. Apologize for that brief moment. So there were some questions that came in, but first I just want to thank all of the presenters. Thank you so much for taking the time to present all of the information. So let's go through some of these questions. So the first one that came in, and Scott, I'm going to actually direct this one towards you. So what is the best way to prepare your pool for winter in freezing conditions?
You know, I think that's going to be a regional thing, really. And once again, it kind of depends on your pool equipment. A couple scenarios. Let's say you are in Colorado or Wyoming or Montana or Minnesota, and you don't have a pool heater. Golly, I would almost defer that to George. But just thinking out of the box with it, I would definitely get a cover, some sort of tarp or something to put over it, and they make these specialized. So you could get with your swimming pool vendor or Amazon for that matter, and buy a cover that's specific for your size swimming pool. Obviously, some type of heater. Even if you got a temporary heater that you just plumbed in, and it wasn't intended to keep your swimmers warm, but intended to only keep your pool from freezing over. So it could only be just a small BTU heater to add some heat load to the water. Circulation will be key. If you're not circulating that water, it's bound to fail, probably even for us here in Austin. Our coldest day is probably like a 20-degree day. If it hits in the teens, like there's some freak thing going on. I think we saw here in Erie, we saw a 0 degree or real close to it, and we all thought we were going to die here. You know, so if you are going to have an extreme condition, you know, reach out to your swimming pool vendor. They probably have the best and up-to-date data and products that you can use, and then they can give you recommendations for your specific swimming pool scenario, or hot tubs, or so on and so forth. So for us here, once again, we're heated, and our homeowners enjoy a swim when it's 20 degrees. A couple of them do anyway. So we seem to be okay on that, but we just make sure preventative maintenance wise that we always keep the pump circulating, and we are keeping our heater up to speed, you know. And I'd only be really concerned about a pool if you're getting into the 20s. Then, you know, if you're going to dip to 32 or 30 degrees for an hour or two, you know, you probably ride through that just fine.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott. Okay, the next question. I believe, George, I will direct this one towards you. We ask our owners and residents to remove snow off balconies. Is this a reasonable request and expectation?
Yeah, Nicole, that's a great question. And that is absolutely a reasonable request and expectation for snow off of balconies. Because if that's not done, that can lead to a number of situations. Primarily one of them would be flooding back into the unit. If there are surface drains on decks and balconies, which there typically are, and sometimes those surface drains, for whatever reason, can become clogged. Maybe there's some extra debris, maybe somehow a block of ice frozen there in some manner, and it backs up when that snow is melting. That can backwash into the home, into the building unit. That can happen into garden homes. That can happen in high-rise buildings where you have those decks butting against, you know, living space. So it is a good idea to remove snow from those locations for sure.
Thank you, George. There's a follow-up question to that. What if we increase from 2 inches to 3 inches before snow removal to save money?
Yeah, that is a cost-saving measure. And a lot of times that is really varies from community to community and personal preference of the residents, of the board, what they're looking for. The rule of thumb that I'm generally seeing is generally 2 inches, quite frankly. When it starts getting above that a little bit, then the concerns start rolling in from the residents about the depth of the snow. But it's certainly okay to go to 3. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a personal preference of each community, what they're looking for in their level of service.
Excellent. Okay, this next question, Scott, you probably will take this one, and whoever else wants to chime in. So what about dry air systems? At some point, they need to be drained in the same manner as water suppression systems. Is that correct? And you feel free to elaborate on that.
Yeah, most definitely. Ideally, a dry system would be dry, but it's just practically impossible to have a truly dry system unless you have some means of evacuating the water besides gravity. Nitrogen can be introduced into a dry pipe system and it will chase the water out of the way. Going in and adding drum drips, if you have a rule of thumb, is if you know the section that looks like it will contain more than 5 gallons of water, you should add a drum drip, because that section of piping is not plumbed right and is holding water. So the only way, unless you're going to rip it down and redo it, you can install a drum drip to get that out. But that then becomes kind of a maintenance item. It is very difficult to completely evacuate the water. You can use the system. As a matter of fact, I just spoke with our sprinkler vendor about this, that if you're familiar with how to operate the dry pipe system, you can valve the water off, open up a test inspection port or a drum drip, and let the system air that's in there blow the water out. And then of course it's not charged. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to then set the system back up again. It didn't trip. Your water's still held back. You just released all the air, and it actually kind of blew the water out. So or blow some of the water out. And if you don't have any other method, you might be able to use the actual working air to evacuate the water out of it. Nitrogen systems, if you have the money and you have a system prone to freezing, and you have one of those reoccurring things, get with your trusted sprinkler vendor. They set up a system where they bring in a nitrogen tank and they put nitrogen in your dry pipe system. And instead of the air compressor coming on and keeping the air pumped up in your dry pipe, you'll have a nitrogen tank that's pumping 10 pounds or 20 pounds or 15 pounds or whatever of nitrogen in there that acts as your holding agent. And then, of course, upon release, it would then release your sprinkler water. But yeah, these are tricky systems. And the biggest thing that I see with them is because of ambient conditions, the density of the air in the pipe changes. And as a result, it has an influence on the pressure. So why the system doesn't automatically correct that lower pressure or higher pressure in a truly good operating system, it should correct and auto adjust. And if you lose a little air or it shrinks the air, the compressor should kick on and fill it back up again. But time and time again, I see where the air condenses and shrinks, the pressure goes down, and then boom, the dry pipe system trips. So if it trips during freezing weather, which happened to us in February, we just drained it and valved it off, and then we did a fire watch on those floors. It was only out in our parking garage, and we only had to do 2 or 3 floors that way, but it was impossible at that point to go repair the damage and try and keep it online. We just figured, okay, just drain it to the best of your ability, valve it off, and then do fire watches. So I think case-by-case scenarios, you'll see different circumstances where, our discussion today may not quite meet the need. So get with your trusted sprinkler contractor, and they can kind of help you tailor a program for your dry pipe system and make sure that it survives to the best of its ability.
Okay, excellent. Okay, I think we have a couple more questions. We got about 4 minutes. So this next question, it says, how much ice melt should be stocked? A rule of thumb, and I guess this was when they lived in Michigan, was to have 50 pounds minimum per snow day to prevent slips, falls. So who would like to take that?
I'll do that a little bit, Nicole. I
Okay.
hate to sound like a broken record and say that it depends on the region and the building, but it really does. I am sure that George keeps a lot more de-icer available than we do here in Texas. And it also depends though on the configuration of your building. Do you have just a single one building structure and there's two main entrances and you're going to have them both de-iced? Or do you have a building like mine that has 3 separate wings and people may be going out of the entrance and exits on those wings as well as in the main central lobby area? Am I going to de-ice all of those, or am I going to just de-ice the main central lobby and maybe my back service desk area? That's a question for the board, the building. But again, I think the key is wherever you are going to use it and how much you're going to use, make sure that your residents know. If I'm only going to be de-icing the front and the back, I am not de-icing the entrances to each individual wing, then I need my residents to know that so they won't go out of those areas and slip and fall.
Yeah, I definitely concur with what Sherry's saying. Here in Colorado, definitely do need probably a little bit more than that, than 50 pounds. But again, it's also dependent on, the areas you have to address. For example, we had that storm blow through here New Year's Eve, and I happened to be out on one of the properties. They have a parking area that has a little bit of a slope getting up to it on a ramp. And for example, that area took, and I was helping with that, it took like 75 pounds of ice melt to clear that area. So it just really dependent on your particular property.
Yeah, one last question. Thank you so much, George and Sherry.
Something to keep in mind if you have a water softener. If let's say you run out of ice melt. Oh, wait, I've got 10 bags of water softener salt that I use for my water softener. That works just the same way. So you could go rob from your water softener and then pay yourself back once you have available salt. Could get you out of a bind.
That's awesome. Thank you, Scott. And then one last question is, I guess it was a follow-up when we were talking about ice. Would you not want to de-ice all required exits? I would assume that you would, but I'll refer to you, Sherry.
Well, again, I think that's a conversation for you to have with your board and your residents. Our building does have a larger footprint than a lot of high rises. We do have 3 separate wings. We have a main lobby entrance and a service desk entrance, and then every single wing has its own entrance. And we actually have a couple other entrances and exits in between that lead out to parking areas or dog walk areas and things like that. So am I going to de-ice all of that in an event when I can direct people to go in and out of the main ones? Probably not, because if I don't know how long that weather event is going to be and I've only got 50 pounds of de-icer because in Texas we don't need it as often, I'm not going to want to use it all in that one event just so that everybody can go walk their dog and be a little bit more convenient of an entry or an exit when I can direct them to go to the 2 main entrances or exits from the building.
Excellent. And it is 6 p.m. Thank you all again. Scott, Sherry, George, Bob, thank you so much for presenting today. And all of you, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hope you have a wonderful evening. And again, I will make sure to send the link out so that you can access this recording. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.